Go ahead and get us started. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I should open it up to questions first based on yesterday's video, which was all about, Joseph talked about the exposure triangle, which the three of that he included are ISO, our ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. So if you have any questions about any of those before we look at them.
I mean, it's always just a struggle. I'm always constantly like trying to figure it out.
It's
And I've
tricky.
been doing this for a little bit. And like some of the events and stuff that we do, you know, no one ever considers the lighting, how it's going to affect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just want it to look good, but it's not always easy for a photographer. And I'm usually not using flash, so I have to do it manually, and it's a constant thing.
Yeah, so like, especially in like those lower lights situations, I know we keep saying like the best camera is the camera that you have, and anywhere like you have your phone, you're all good to go. But like if you're in those super low light situations or like live events and stuff like that, that's really where the nicer cameras with the nicer lenses and the bigger sensors and like all of that, that's where it's really going to show the biggest difference.
So is the difference mostly that you just can control it more?
That's the biggest one of the biggest differences, I guess. So you have so much more control, and the more money you spend on a camera, typically the more level of control you get with it. You kind of start with like your basic iPhone, which they're adding a lot more control to, but then you kind of move up to like the point and shoot cameras, which give you a little more control. And there's like the high end point and shoot cameras.
To be fair, this is $1,000 piece of machinery.
That's true.
Right? It's not a low cost thing.
Yeah.
It's built in with everything else.
For sure.
I mean, this has got to be better than a lot of the point and shoots, right?
I don't know if I would say that. It probably has better auto like software inside of it to kind of try and make whatever you're doing look as good as possible. Mm-hmm. But you still probably have a little more control and better. Yeah, it does come down to the control again and being able to manipulate what you're using. And there's like with even some of the base point and shoot cameras that may cost less than an iPhone, you can still have some optical zoom and stuff like that, and you just get more out of the device itself. Gotcha. And so then once you get to the DSLRs and the mirrorless cameras and everything up there, that's where you can also start switching out lenses and everything, which makes a big impact as well. And so then I would say one of the other big differences about the higher end cameras is the sensor that's on them. The DSLRs that we use in our offices, like they have large full frame sensors, which just mean that you're going to be able to get, first of all, higher megapixel photos and things like that. But then also it's just like, it's able to capture what you're seeing a lot better, especially in lower light situations. It's able to capture a lot more light coming into the camera, versus like the iPhone. That's one of the major flaws about like just a straight phone camera, is the sensor size is so small compared to the actual cameras that you could go out and buy. And that's one of the things, like any new update to a new phone, like they try and brag about their new improved larger sensor within the camera and everything like that.
Maybe a stupid question. What is it sensing? Light?
So it's basically like, so you saw in yesterday's video when there was the close-ups on like the shutter going up and down and moving across that thing is like this square kind of sensor is a sensor. And so it's literally on the sensor are thousands of pixels going across, and each pixel captures a point of light and then converts it into that digital image. And so that's what's happening there. And so the larger your sensor, the better quality of the image you're going to be able to get out of it. So there's that. Is there, I forget what even the question was to start off that, but that makes sense.
Yes.
Welcome, Monica.
Hello.
I was just asking if anyone had any questions regarding yesterday's video in the exposure triangle with the ISO in aperture and shutter speed before we start looking at the pictures.
I think I'm okay.
Yeah. Good.
It's just something you kind of have to play with.
Exactly. Yeah. So in one of the things that I tell people when they're starting out with photography, because a lot of people will buy a high-end DSLR or something, or not a high-end, but a low-end DSLR or something, and they'll just still shoot on auto. And so like that kills me to see, because it's like you're basically not using it for what it's made to do. Yeah. And so like it's one of those things that you really have to just go through and play with each setting individually. And so there are different settings on most DSLRs too. Like you can change it. There's the letters, there's the A, and there's the S, and is there a T? I'm not sure what the letters are, but they're each one of the letters on the thing. There's an M, and then there's the auto. Each one kind of prioritizes a certain setting on your camera. And so like the one that I always tell people to kind of, well, my preference at least when I'm starting is to kind of focus more on the aperture priority, which is typically the A on the camera. And sorry, I thought Laura was talking to us, but she's talking to someone else. So the A setting, the aperture priority, you can adjust the aperture setting to whatever you want it to be, whether that's high or low, which typically like I try and shoot with the aperture as low as possible to get as much light in there and get as much depth of field as possible. And then it will manually adjust the other two settings for the right exposure. And so like you can play around individually with just one setting at a time and see what a high aperture does, or see what the low aperture does, or high shutter speed, low shutter speed, and it will adjust the rest for you. So that's a really good way to kind of play around with those individually.
Is that just your camera, or is that a pretty standard thing?
That's a pretty standard. Even a lot of the point and shoots will have that as well. You may not necessarily get that on your phone, again, because it comes down to the control that they give you, but that's pretty standard though around the board for all that. So, but I mean, that was your homework for yesterday's video, was to just like play around with those settings. That's all Joseph really said to do. So if there are any other questions, we can answer them, but otherwise I'll get into going through what we have. So, oh, that wasn't a question. That was Bernie talking. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Maybe. Okay. Can you see that? Did that work?
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's start. First, I have Bethany's. Are you back, Bethany?
Hey, I'm doing some tech issues. Give me a minute.
Okay, I'm gonna skip yours
Thank you.
and we'll go to Josh's. Josh, do you prefer Josh or Joshua?
Either
Okay.
preference.
Awesome. So do you just want to tell us, we'll go one by one, just like what setting you are kind of focusing on to kind of get this or maintain this exposure, or just kind of whatever was going through your mind as you were taking this?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to play around and do something different than what I normally do, because normally I shoot kind of like you said, just as wide open as possible,
Yeah.
much depth of field as possible. So I was like, well, let me mix it up and we'll shoot at, a really closed down aperture.
Yeah.
Try to get, I think this was like at f10, something like that. But just to
Yeah.
get everything in focus, see what I could.
And kind of the
come
same
up
with this one too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
So those are both, yeah.
Yeah, I really like both of these. And you can tell that, yeah, because everything is in focus, you can tell that your aperture is really high, kind of closed in there. And the exposure shows a little bit too. Were you purposefully kind of trying to keep it darker as well, or is that just more of a what happened because of the aperture?
Well, I mean, I was shooting raw, so they were a little brighter
Yeah. So you
before.
edited
I
this too?
edited, yeah,
Okay.
I edited them to
Go darker, which I actually really like. Like, I don't know if I would have kept it brighter. Like, I mean, I like what you've done and made it kind of darker. It's definitely like, um, it shows a lot more emotion, I think, kind of even in the images that you would kind of get if you just took a straight photo of whatever you were seeing.
Right.
So it's really neat. And I like the way that you've composed both of them too.
Thanks.
Very nice. Now, are you ready, Bethany? No. Yes. Sorry.
Yes, I'm back. I had to do a little technology finagling. Okay, so this is the Lego set that I have here at the office.
Nice.
And so I just needed some props today, and that helped. So basically, I had no idea really how to play with ISO and aperture and all that kind of stuff because all I have to work with right now is my phone. But Laura taught me this amazing trick about, what did you call it, Laura, where you pick, I'm going to show you.
Like when you zoom in and lock the screen.
You push in, and then it does this little lock, and it says AE or AF lock, and it
Yep.
just helps focus. So when you move it around, the focus stays on that item. And
And
then
then
you
you
can
can
change
change.
brightness and stuff, which I
Yeah.
didn't know, but that was really fun. So with these 3 photos, I just tried doing that. So with this one, with Phoebe, I focused on something that was in the background. So you see the foreground got blurry, which I thought was excellent. And a lot of fun. And this one, I focused on something in the foreground. So you see the friends in the background that are a little bit blurry. I tried to set up this whole photo where you see Gunter like staring at Rachel, but it didn't come out right. So I didn't. But you can appreciate that from your own hearts. So I just tried to
Yes.
focus on different things to see what it looked like. And I was really excited about it. It was a fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it turned out really well. And so that is like one of the best tools to know how to use, like within your iPhone camera itself, like to be able
Well, you
to,
don't need an extra app or anything.
yeah,
You know,
it's just right there. You just kind of press and hold and it'll lock the focus. And then the exposure really is like the best part of it, to be able to move up and down and change the exposure. Because a lot of times the auto settings, that's one of the things that it doesn't get right the
Right.
most, I think. So,
And it doesn't do the blurry lines that the portrait mode does.
right. Yep. Yep. Because
so much
this is all done like actually with the camera and the sensor and the lens and everything, rather than like with the portrait mode, it does that all, it's just like fake blurred. Like it takes the regular photo and then tries to figure out what's in the background and then blurs it out after the fact, which then you get the lines kind of around the face and especially hair and stuff like that, because it can only do so well.
And I've never really used portrait mode, but you can't control the blurriness, right? Like you can't control how much.
Nope, that's all whatever it decides to do. Which, I mean, in like you can get really good pictures with it. I talk down about it, but like I use it all the time too, even if I'm using my phone, just because like it does typically do very well, especially if you have enough light for it to actually see what's happening and working with. But yeah, I think you're still gonna get you're gonna get a more realistic and better look and feel and everything when you actually do it with the lens itself.
Although with the portrait mode, it has to be close to you. It has to be within a certain amount of feet. So knowing that this one, I can focus on something that's a little farther away and it blurs what's in front. You don't have that option.
Yeah.
So this is a really cool tool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laura.
Nice job. So, Luger.
That's not the greatest. I mean, it's a little blurry, but
it's cute.
I like it. And so you were trying to go for like that blurry kind of background with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good. And so like this, you get more of like the blurriness in this just because she is actually like right up close to it. And so it's going to show more of that blur as it focuses in just because of science. Like,
Yeah.
but
And I didn't use portrait mode,
Sorry.
so that was just my number.
Yeah. But I think it's turned out really well. And did you edit this a little too?
Yeah.
I could tell like it's a little lower contrast, which I mean, that's kind of like my general preference leads more towards like the lower contrast kind of
Yeah.
settings and everything. And so I guess we'll talk about that in a little bit too, because that's today's video. But yeah, it's turned out really well. And then we have Monica's. So can you tell us what settings you were kind of playing around with, or what you were trying to get when you were taking?
I was trying to just get the movement of the water.
Sure. Yeah.
To kind of, so it was, I was just shooting with my iPhone and just kind of playing with stuff around a little bit. But I just really liked how I was able to get. Ooh,
Sorry.
now this one, the other one,
Yeah.
that's in my office.
Yeah.
And again, I was just kind of playing with stuff and just getting that. This was on that app. I don't remember which app it was.
Is it the one Joseph had mentioned yesterday?
It may have been the one Joseph was talking about. Yeah.
But so like a manual camera app
Yeah,
on
exactly. Yeah. So it was just kind of playing with it and see. I really just liked how it just was all really fuzzy.
Yeah. And well, and so that's exactly what like Joseph had said in the video, to literally just play around with the settings. And that's the only way you really learn what they do and kind of figure it out. So that's awesome that you, I mean, it's a really kind of neat picture too. I like that. Like it's something that like you could almost take on accident.
Right.
But then like when you've done it on purpose, it's just kind of like, that's neat. Like, good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Monica, I just think your office is haunted. You need to move out of it.
Well, yeah, that's probably true too. But,
And so, yeah, and then this one was outside. You had a fire.
Yeah, this was outside. This was this past week when we had a small event here, and just trying to get the light with the fires and stuff.
Yeah.
I was kind of pleased that I at least was able to get some clarity in it.
Right. Did you adjust any like settings manually for this at all?
I did, but I don't know enough to know what I did. I just kind of played with it till it was open enough that I could pull some light.
Yeah.
I like shooting at night, but I don't really know how to do it yet.
Well, and it's not easy. That's the thing about it. So like to get a picture like this is pretty good. Like you can tell that the camera itself, like, I don't know if you did this. I mean, I guess you didn't do it on purpose, but like you can tell that the ISO for this picture is pretty high, more because of like the grain kind of throughout it. And so that's like one of the harder parts when you get to shooting at night and in those lower light settings, is trying to get the right exposure without getting the ISO too high, which in some situations with some cameras is almost impossible. But I mean, overall it's really well. And so in editing, you can kind of start to take out some of that too.
Okay.
But yeah, it's come out pretty good. I like it. So then the only ones we have left are mine.
Well, that's awesome.
So this was Ray. I was telling Bethany this was just last night as we were watching Alone on Amazon Prime. I just grabbed my camera. And so this was actually with a point and shoot camera that I have. It's a higher end point and shoot. My mirrorless digital camera is currently being used by Chris Hoffer in the music department for his lessons and stuff. But so I grabbed my point and shoot, and I was able to, what I did for this is I adjusted the aperture again, as wide as it can go to let as much light in as possible, which also will kind of give you
How low does it go? Is it
so
like
that point and shoot goes when it's zoomed out all the way, it's at 1.8, and if you zoom in with the optical lens, it goes to 2.8 is the lowest when it's out there. And so I left it zoomed out as much as possible so that I could get as down to that 1.8 aperture, and then just literally I was like this close from her face, like taking this picture to get like that blurriness in the background. And she just kind of kept opening her eyes and just like staring at me like, what are you doing?
She's the most
But I'm like,
photogenic dog.
just like stay there, like don't move. Yeah, and so I think it came out pretty well. I took like a whole bunch of them, including, I just wanted to show you that one too. This didn't end up turning out quite as well as the one yesterday, but I just had to show you because she's always yawning. So yeah, and then the rest I just kind of adjusted for exposure again based on that aperture. So that's that. That's all our pictures. Are there any other questions? We're wrapping up here in a minute. Today's video is about editing your photos. It took me a second, I had to remember. And so Joseph shares a couple of different apps that you can use on your phone and on a computer. Some of them are free, some of them are not free. And really it just kind of, again, comes down to whatever you have will work and does a lot of the same things. You get a little more control again as you pay more and get more advanced programs and things like that. But in the end, they still really kind of all do the same thing. And so he'll share kind of like just the basics. The editing is one of those tricky ones where it really does come down to like your personal preferences so much. Or I can stop sharing my screen. I guess it doesn't matter. I don't know how to stop sharing it. That's fine. Oh, there we go. So like with the personal preferences, like I just mentioned when we were looking at the picture of Luger, like one of my personal preferences is kind of like the lower contrast instead of like the high contrast. But it's like this fine line of you don't want it too low, you still want the contrast because the contrast is what helps to make a really good image. And so it's kind of like finding that balance and kind of figuring out what your personal preference is as you play with it. And so it's just kind of over the years of me editing thousands of photos, I've kind of figured out what I like and what works well. One of the things Joseph says in the video though is to kind of just figure out like a base for the image. Like this is what the image just truly looks like. Figure out the right exposure, get all of that, and then kind of work on your personal preferences from there. And I think that's really good. And that's what we do a lot with our videos that we edit in our department too, because then you can get everything at a base level and then adjust from there for the color correction and everything. And so I guess.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's hard with the color correction too, because you can be too blue or too warm. Where is that happy medium sometimes?
Yeah, and so they have like white balance cards and stuff, so you can try and figure out like the true white when you're taking photos, and it's hard. It's not easy, and so again, like a lot of times it does end up coming down to personal preference too, and just when you look at the image, what kind of color do you see in it, and what do you want to see in it, and along that slider. And like that's one of the things, even like my personal preference over the years has changed. I used to edit everything really warm and kind of orangey and yellowy, not like too much, but more on that side. And now when I edit photos, I tend to lean more towards the cool side. And so it's kind of one of those things that just changes and depends on what you're trying to make the person feel as well. So it's 11:29 now. I don't want you guys to miss the video. But if you have any other questions, real quick, I can answer, but otherwise.
There's a 2-minute buffer period.
Oh, that's true too.
That's good. Did you guys get on this morning using the Attendify or using the event app, or did you go through our personal website?
I'm on Attendify and I don't see anybody on that list.
Yeah.
I went through the link to the with the class.
Yeah. Apparently Attendify was down for about 15 minutes earlier. So I was wondering,
Oh.
like at the beginning of class. So everybody else is not getting into classes, but we were already going. Josh, how did you get in? Through the website?
Yeah, through the website.
Cool. Okay.
The
Well,
one other thing, sorry, I was going to say one more thing real quick, because at the end of the video, Joseph doesn't say what to turn in this time. So if you could, whatever picture you upload, submit the before and then the after. I think that would be great, because this is about the editing, and so I kind of want to see what changes you've made straight out of the camera and then the edit, if you can.
Good.
All right, thank you.
Thank
All right.
you. Bye, y'all. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.